UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Greetings, people of Earth, and welcome to another edition of UAP Crossfire. Joining me tonight, Chris DiPerno from the snowy, ice-covered lands of upstate New York. And
Indeed.
Down there in rain-soaked Southern California, we have Don Ecker. No Commander Cobra tonight. He's off somewhere flying around saving the planet. But we are here with you to discuss all things UAP and paranormal. Gentlemen, good evening. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing great in this wonderful winterland of Buffalo, New York. Can't have it any better than sub-zero 3 weather.
Oh, boy.
You know?
Yeah. How about you, Don? You a little wet?
Well, I was advised to start building an ark a few days ago. I still haven't gotten to it. I'm looking outside now. I'm wishing I would have.
There should be a lot of trees down there that you can get. They might be a little burnt, but
well, no, I have one right beside our driveway that came down a week ago or 2 weeks ago in a windstorm we were having that was fanning the flames. So, it's always exciting here.
Well, that's good to hear. Say, speaking of exciting, a lot of talk in the news about this week's little press conference with Paulina Luna, Congresswoman from the 13th District of Florida, and her announcement in creation of a task force for the declassification of federal secrets, going to be looking into the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., the origins of COVID-19, 9/11, and UAPs and USOs. I'd like to know, gentlemen, what your thoughts are. Are we getting closer to disclosure, or is this just another snow job? Chris?
Well, I would just suggest she stay away from 3rd and 4th story windows. Do not go on the rooftop.
I want to see what the betting pool is for her to get assassinated down in Nevada.
And when she crosses the street, be very careful.
Wow.
Yeah.
You really think that that's a legitimate threat?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, why do you say that, Mr.
Go ahead, Don. You first.
Well, I've been around the planet a few times, Padre. Okay. I've seen things when I was in Southeast Asia that would not be good fodder for polite company. So I'm just saying, be aware.
Okay.
Well,
now, Mr. DiPerno, what are your thoughts?
Well, being a person who's already been threatened by three-letter agency at one time in my life, I take them very seriously. So for this lady to start talking about JFK, all right, maybe she might get away with that. She'll get away with MLK and RFK. But when you start talking about 9/11, and you start talking about some other subjects that she wants to put the notice out on, accidents happen. Your car goes off a cliff, or you get caught on fire in a swimming pool because gasoline was poured in there.
Wow. A couple of real Debbie Downers here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, projecting doom upon government officials.
Listen, Chris, I was a rough, tough Marine.
Yep.
And this one guy, chief of station, had me almost pissing in my pants. So,
tell us more.
These guys are very serious when it comes to keeping secrets.
They don't joke around. You said that you were threatened by a 3-letter agency. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the chief of station. I went into a room that I wasn't supposed to go in, but I didn't know about it. There was a room at one of the embassies I was working at, and it looked like just a typical room. And I walked in and I went, oh, what's all this stuff? And of course, the room being open was a security violation. So dumbass here wrote it up and said, this room over here that has no number, no nothing, it's just a white door, was open. And the next thing I know, I'm being brought into a skiff, and I was told I could pretty much find myself in a hole somewheres as people were pissing on your grave. So I kind of got the idea that I better not even go near that room again.
Well, both of you are veteran UAP UFO investigators. In the course of that kind of research, have either of you had unpleasant encounters with government officials? Nope.
Well, okay. I for over 20 years, I was a director of research for UFO magazine.
Mm-hmm.
This was a publication begun by my wife, who was a working journalist, okay, a journalism graduate, had worked as a reporter, had an interest and a fascination in the UFO topic. And as a journalist, she was somewhat outraged by the way mainstream media reported the subject, reported on the subject. And so she began this publication. I came on board in 1988. And our main MO was to go strictly for the facts, the cases, the people, the witnesses we could talk to, places that I went I had been a criminal investigator. So I knew how to conduct an investigation. I've been on more than one or two investigating UFO things, especially a very weird part of the topic, which was cattle mutilations.
Okay.
I investigated as a criminal investigator 2 cattle mutilations in my duties as an investigator. And so, I mean, we went strictly as far as the topic was concerned, the nuts and the bolts of it. Now, with that being said, our objective was to eventually get the mainstream media, or at least elements within it, to sit up, take notice, and treat this as a legitimate topic. Now, in the early 90s, I broke, as the director of research, 2 extremely important cases on national television. One was the Phobos 2 mission launched from the former, at that time still, the Soviet Union. And then a case that came to me from another UFO investigator back east concerning a space shuttle flight, an encounter with something. And we thought, and I ended up on NBC, CNN, and some other places with these cases. And we thought that sure as God made small green apples, other news media would be getting in touch with us to find out what exactly was what with these cases. Not a peep. Now, in those days, if I may be so bold, there was I guess you'd have to say, an unwritten mandate with mainstream media that if they ended up reporting on a UFO story or topic, okay, invariably they'd be playing, as they introduced the thing, they would be playing weird music. As time went on, they started with the X-Files music, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I can remember a couple of broadcasts where those moron reporters ended up putting on literally tinfoil hats when they were talking about this. Okay. So somebody had put the word out a long time ago that, this is not something you can treat honestly and legitimately. Well, it's somewhat changed now in the last, since 2017, I
Mhm.
guess you could say. But for anybody out there thinking that this topic, UFOs, UAPs, will eventually undergo disclosure, from my standpoint and my experience, I'm here to tell you, forget about it. Don't bank any money on that unless the ETs, for whatever reason in their own mind, decided to land in Washington, D.C. or at the UN. Okay. That's the only way there'll ever be disclosure, because at the very core of this topic, and this goes back almost 80 years, the original people that investigated this discovered something at the core of this topic that terrified them.
Hmm.
And they were terrified if this ever became public knowledge. Now, what that may be is open for speculation, but that's basically the bottom line on this, Padre.
Okay, Chris, your turn. Are you optimistic about disclosure or not?
You know, that's a tough one, Padre, because I think with this president and what they're trying to do, this has the best chance. But I gotta say, Don has some things in there that I think are very valid. And I'll start with this. I truly believe that there is something nefarious that they don't want out. Now, I say that because Tucker Carlson and a few other people have actually got kind of close to the truth. They talked to people who might be in the know. And Tucker Carlson was so scared because he was a big UFO buff. There was no question about it. Oh yeah, we're going to do this. He used to have it on his show almost every night, at least once or twice a week, something about UFOs.
Mhm.
But then he found some information that he said he wouldn't even tell his wife about. He said it frightened him so much that he doesn't want anything to do with the subject anymore. Which, for a reporter who was on the cusp of maybe finding in some information like that and to back away. So that's my first thought. The second thought is you have to understand that some of the stuff that we've been talking about, if it comes out and is disclosed, they're going to ask these very, very sensitive questions. For instance, everybody talks about maybe Eisenhower made a treaty with extraterrestrials to have a certain amount of people abducted for technology. The story goes that he first met with the Palladians, and the Palladian says, we're not going to give you any weapon technology. We would give you a technology to do this, this, and this. And Eisenhower first turned it down. Then the second time he met with the Greys, and he was warned not to meet with the Greys because they're nefarious. And so he met with the Greys, and he was able to strike a deal that, they would know who was abducted. They could only abduct so many people for research. They had to bring them back, and we would get technology that was weaponized because we were in a Cold War with Russia. Now, the thing is that they made a deal for people to be kidnapped. I don't call it an abduction. I call it a kidnap and an assault. Now, the U.S. government, think about this. The U.S. government gave permission to a different entity to take you from your home, do experiments on you without your permission, to hurt you, to steal stuff from your biological stuff from your body, and all in the name of the U.S. government so they can have a weapon. How would you explain that to the American people? How do you say, well, guys, we've allowed this to happen, and it's gotten out of control because they were only supposed to take maybe 50 people a year, and they took 1,000, and some of them never came back, and some of them have permanent injuries. So how do you explain to the American people that we made this deal? That's just one theory. And then you have the stuff, well, we allowed them to walk among us, and they've been manipulating our society. Now, if that's true, how do you explain that to the American people? So I believe what Don is saying is that these are very nefarious things that the U.S. government or the intelligence, I will say not the U.S. government, not the president, because a lot of presidents don't know this, but if the intelligence agencies know this and they're allowed this to happen for year after year after year without stopping it or making people aware of it or helping these people after they're done, you people are going to go to jail for a long time if they're
Yeah.
still alive.
Well, isn't kidnapping a capital offense in some states?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
kidnapping, assault second, injecting somebody with needles. But who's going to put handcuffs on a gray alien?
well, if that is indeed the case, Chris, then the government would have to possess a list of those who were taken, wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't there have
No,
to be
but
an
suppose
account?
they don't know. Suppose the Grays never gave them a list.
Huh.
Suppose the Grays says, "Yeah, screw you. I made a treaty with you. Yeah, we'll give you a pop gun here, and we're just going to take these people anyways." You don't know, if this is true or not. But we as investigators have, especially on the show, have uncovered things that we've given pretty good evidence that are true, that would make you want to believe that this other stuff is true.
Wow. So have you ever investigated, go back to Don here. Don, have you ever investigated a case of a missing person that was associated with UAP?
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Yes. Are you familiar with the rock group Iron Butterfly?
I've
Yeah.
heard of them.
Yeah.
Do you know what their most famous song is?
No.
Ingata Devita?
Yeah.
Okay. The guy that wrote that song was a UFO enthusiast.
Okay.
And this is over 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago. And I remember it. As a matter of fact, I talked to his sister. He disappeared under very mysterious circumstances. Later on, okay, his body was discovered. But that was, 25, maybe it was 28 years ago. I forget now exactly. It was in the mid 90s when he went missing. But that was all wrapped up in, among other things, his deep, I should say, UFO interest. So that was a case. Now, that's of course not the only case. If you look nationwide and especially around the globe. Now, in 1988, after I made the acquaintance of paranormal author, investigator 14, John Keel, I was talking to him on the phone one day. I had just interviewed John for an article that we published in the magazine, in UFO magazine. And we were talking about some odd things. And I had made the acquaintance and was friends with the then MUFON state director for the state of Idaho, a gentleman by the name of Don Mason. And Don knew my background. And he called me up one day and he said, "Hey," he said, "here's something that you probably are going to find very interesting." And he said, "Can you come up to my place?" So I said, "Sure." So I jumped in my car. I drove up there and went in, sat down with him. He said, "You investigated as a cop a couple of cattle mutilations, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "There were some really strange things about those, right?" And of course he knew there was. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, yeah, among other things, the strange precision that the wounds were on those animals, the animals' head, missing eyeball, the removal of their sexual organs, and the fact, and this was the weirdest part of it, those animals were exsanguinated totally. He said, I just was notified by, he had a lot of cop friends. He said, I was just notified by a deputy sheriff that a guy was discovered down near, I forget that it's a small town in southern Idaho. He was out in the woods, and some hunters or hikers discovered his almost nude body lying in a field. And his sexual organs had been removed. An eye had been excised. Now, I don't know this. I wasn't told this specifically, but I'm presuming that he had been exsanguinated. And about a mile away from where the body was, and he, by the way, didn't have shoes or socks on. A mile away from where the body was, they discovered his other personal possessions and clothing. A mile. Now, I listened to this and I was kind of shocked by it, because that ended up being one of the things that put me on a almost 4-year crusade that I was on investigating human mutilations. And that was one case. There were other cases. There was a very famous case that cropped up. And some of these, by the way, I got from John Keel. But there was a famous case where 2 bodies were discovered down in Brazil with a very mysterious, cryptic note that was lying very near the bodies. Both these guys were wearing what appeared to be a face-forming lead mask over their heads. They were mutilated. And another case that Keel gave me involved a married couple that had been down in Mexico, were coming back up to the Texas border to cross back into the United States. And out of literally a clear blue sky, no aircraft in sight, nothing visible, a severed human body dropped out of the sky onto the highway. Well, make of that what you will, but these are the kind of things that very seldom ever get reported in the mainstream news. Quite frankly, it would scare hell out of people.
Yeah, I would say so.
How about you, Chris? Have you ever investigated a missing person case associated with UAP?
Not as a police officer. Well, here's the thing. I've investigated many a missing person that's never been found. But the problem is, how do you know it's UFO related? It's a very difficult thing. I think there's more. I mean, my honest opinion, I think there's much more missing people that are UFO related that we don't know about, just simply because the way the vanishing took place, or the way the crime, I'm going to say, took place, leaves no physical evidence. It's not like it was, somebody saw a van pull up and somebody came out and grabbed her. It was like, yeah, we watched this person ride a bike, and the next time we turned around, the person was gone. And we can't say that they were abducted. We can't, obviously they were abducted, but we can't say it's extraterrestrial related, because we don't know, because we didn't actually see what happened. The witnesses haven't exactly seen what happened when this incident takes place. They could say, Why, and it's a lot of sometimes children where they turn around and they say, I was watching my child in the backyard, and I left the window for a minute. When I went back, she was gone and never seen again.
You know,
So you have those type of incidences.
in my novel, Species Unknown, I mentioned I did some research as to how many people go missing every year worldwide. It's a huge number. It's like 4.5 million
Yeah.
people disappear without a trace.
Right.
They're just gone
Right.
worldwide. Now, in the United States, it's about 500,000. Of those, roughly half are eventually solved as a spouse taking a child without permission, or somebody just wanted to go away for a while. But that's still 250,000 Americans vanish without a trace every year, and nobody ever knows what happened to them.
Now, not as a police officer, but I will tell you that we have had reports in the MUFON database where people who have been abducted have seen human body parts, from their abduction. They come back and they'll swear up and down that they have seen mutilated body parts in that incident, in that scenario. And it's not just one person, it's a lot of people. And so this is a very frightening situation because, like I said, I would go back and say the people who have been abducted, not only are they being experimented on, but are they being experimented on to the point where they lose their life? Just like what Don said, he's had body parts and mutilated people. Well, and when a person is hacked up, you can kind of tell. Forensics will tell you exactly, hey, there was a hatchet used, there was a knife used, this is the type of knife. I mean, forensics nowadays are so good. They can almost give you the brand of the knives and stuff that, or the tool that was used. I mean, I watched them match up screwdrivers and everything else to the fact.
Wow.
But there's these cases that they go, we don't know what did this. We don't know. I mean, the cut, like Don says, the cuts are so precision making that it becomes an unknown. And so you kind of go, what was the murder weapon? Well, it might have been this, or our conclusion is that it might have been this. And so you are left with a doubt of how this happened. Now, no coroner is going to come out and say, hey, this is UFO related because the cuts are so precision, or we can't identify what the exact thing is. It's not going to happen, because how are you going to get a murder conviction on ET? Stuff like that you can't indict them. So the thing that we have to look at is what is actually going on. So and get this out to the public so at least they know about it. At least we can track the people who have been taken multiple times and be able to say, hey, listen, let's see if there's anything that can work. It's like, your right to try. You remember Trump put in the right to try, which should be for this too, for multiple decades. Right to try something that may work.
We have somebody on my private chat here who's saying that they were taken at the age of 5.5. And I just say, if you're still listening to us, go ahead and type your story in and I'll take a look at it. But while we're still on this subject, Don, you're kind of our resident expert on ancient civilizations. And as Chris was talking there, I got to thinking, if alien, whether it's multiple species or one species of non-human intelligence, is insisting on getting human samples or human flesh, do you think that in the ancient cultures that practiced human sacrifice, that they might have been in fact sacrificing to ETs, and that they were taking the bodies to enhance the religious fervor? Have you encountered anything like that?
Well, this is no reflection on you, but that's a rather sloppy question.
Oh, no.
to answer, to kind of bore into
It's
it.
my Don.
I believe, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest, that a highly, highly advanced technological civilization came here a very long time ago, perhaps anywhere between 420 to 500,000 years ago. Okay. Now, this is maintained in the recovered cuneiform tablets from places like Babylonia, Assyria, Sumeria. Okay. And they talk about these entities that came down. Now, whether they overtly presented themselves as gods, or the primitive humans saw these beings and just assumed they were gods, they became objects of abject veneration. They were treated and believed to be gods. Now, there were actually two of them from the Sumerian legends and cuneiform tablets, the reports, two who were called the Anunnaki by the Sumerians, which basically translates is those who from heaven to earth came down, or came down. And there were two brothers. They were in charge of the so-called Earth mission. The bastard of the two was named Enlil. The other one, who was more kindly disposed to human beings, was named Enki. Now, as time went on, and it's the Sumerians believed, okay, that their race was created by these Anunnaki gods. Now, as time moved along and primitive humans became a bit more adept, they were taught technologies by these beings, like, for example, agriculture, animal husbandry, astronomy, mathematics, timekeeping, the stars, okay? All these things that if as I was taught when I was in college a long time ago, okay, that human civilization began 6,000 years ago. Even then, I didn't believe that, okay? Humans have been around in our current form as Homo sapiens sapiens for 200, 300,000 years, perhaps a little more. And we were intelligently designed. Now, Zecharia Sitchin, the guy who wrote what today is collectively known as the Earth Chronicles series, his very first book. And I strongly recommend, if you have not read it, get a copy of it. It's entitled The 12th Planet. That's the first book in his series, and read it. I had many conversations with Sitchin about this, and his theories basically involved the hunt for precious metals and other items that these beings ended up taking from the earth. And one of them was gold. Now, I never completely understood. I mean, we regard gold as a precious metal. At one point, it was what basically our economy was based on, the gold standard, which went away a long time ago, which was kind of a shame. But gold is a precious metal. What else could you use it for? Well, electronics.
Yeah.
You can use it in electronics. According to Sitchin's research, they also used, the Anunnaki also used it to try to sustain their atmosphere on their planet which by all accounts was severely ecologically damaged. Okay. Now, where did they get the workforce? The workforce, according to these records, okay, these cuneiform tablets, came when the Anunnaki took early proto-humans and basically genetically tinkered with them. And our race is the end result. Originally, we were designed to do one thing, be a slave labor race that did the hard work for them. But then some of them decided, well, you know what? Those earth women are not bad looking. Let's go down and check some of them out. And things like the Book of Enoch describe that in great detail. And the result, the progeny that came from those unions ended up being another bunch of badasses called the Nephilim. Okay. In the Bible, they say men of great renown, but these things were monsters. They were cannibals. They ate human beings. Okay. They used humans as a food source. And according to the Bible, the Lord God looked down upon the face of the earth, and he was basically pissed off at what he saw, and he launched the flood. Well, we did have a flood. Now, whether it came from God or the heavens because of a comet or an asteroid strike, something happened. But untold millions and millions of humans and other animal species were washed away in the aftermath. So does that answer your question, Padre?
Yeah, I guess I was more honing in on this need to have humans that both of you have alluded to, and it's a very dark thought indeed. If throughout human history there have been non-human intelligences for one reason or another who have to have a supply of human bodies or flesh to do whatever they're doing with it. I know you start to connect the dots on that, and you begin to wonder, well, are they the ones who instigate wars? Are they the ones who, instigate calamities? And
you see, the thing about the Anunnaki, they were a very dysfunctional group of people. Okay. And each of these, in air quotes, gods had their own followers.
Yeah.
And they ended up warring with each other because of perceived slights, this, that, something else. So we were also taught warfare by these beings. And by the way, if you noticed, it's never really gone away.
No, it hasn't. And yeah, that's disturbing. Chris, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, yeah, I think it's actually farther back than what Don is mentioning with the Sumerians. I mean, the Sumerians are believed to have been the oldest civilized race going as far as human sapiens and stuff. But in Turkey, we just discovered not that long ago. We knew about it in the 60s, but we really didn't start digging it up to 90s, a place called Göbekli Tepe. Now, Göbekli Tepe, we found out, is 12,000 years old. 12,000, well before the Sumerians. And they had structures, they had living quarters, they had all kinds of different things. And of course, they had astrological signs and things like that. For instance, here's a picture. So you could see 12,000 years ago, they had somehow had the ability to form walls, to make stone objects, to design stone objects. Now, some of these boulders are 10 tons or more.
Wow.
That they put up on pedestals. So how did this civilization go from Göbekli Tepe, and they found that it's not just one site. There is an entire city of these structures all over Turkey. And here's the most remarkable thing. They were filled in. How could they fill in an entire city? How could they fill in an entire city? That is the most unbelievable thing. Nowadays, it would be impossible. Think about taking New York City and filling it in where it disappears. But yet in Göbekli Tepe, this was done.
Well, Chris, I got a little info on that. First off, Sumeria was much older than 6,000 years.
I'm talking 12,000 years.
Yeah, I know. I was pointing out that that's what I was taught in school. Okay. We all know that the Younger Dryas event, which culminated in that mind-bending flood that encompassed all parts of the planet. I mean, hell, we're finding ruins under hundreds, if not thousands of feet. There's an entire complex right off the coast of Cuba, okay, that's down around 2,000 feet with buildings and pyramids and what have you, that at one point was above water. So my point was, and I didn't articulate it that carefully, is that human beings were technologically, now how advanced, I don't know, but technologically advanced, okay, until the flood, and the flood wiped everything out. The Sumerians, okay, that popped up 6,000 years ago, I believe were refugees. And Turkey, if you get right down to it, at least as far as this discussion goes, was the actual cradle of civilization. They flowed down, they took them right into what today is Syria, Iraq, Iran. All these areas were where these people emigrated to. But you're right, Göbekli Tepe, the workmanship on those pillars and those columns, the crafting, the astronomical depictions on those are beyond anything that hunter-gatherers could have ever put together.
Agree.
Whoever did those were highly skilled artisans.
All right.
Highly
So
skilled.
here's my theory, which coordinates with yours. So I'm saying that the Sumerians may have been a slave race, which I'm not doubting that. Why couldn't they have come back more than once? How do we know how many times other species, extraterrestrials, have come to your Earth, and used us for whatever purposes, and that we have seen civilizations come and gone on this planet? How old is the Earth? 4.5 billion years old? You could put a lot of civilizations at that time, die off, come back, die off, come back. If they were able to develop us once, and I'm not saying that's the case, but let's say they taken us, they found us there, and maybe genetically altered us to their specifications that they've wanted, and then they said, okay, we're done. And then 100,000 years later, they come back and say, hey, we're going to use them again and again, because we have evidence that shows that we've had civilizations on this planet.
Are you familiar with the Solarian hypothesis?
I've heard of it. I can't really speak about it on the show until I do some more research on it.
Well, let me just give you a thumbnail sketch. A couple of scientists were wondering how long would it take for a civilization to completely vanish, okay? Nothing at all left. No buildings, no vehicle, nothing, just gone. Not even fossils. Could we make a determination if anybody ever existed there? And they came up with an answer. Yes, there's one thing that we can research and look for. You know what that is? A carbon footprint. Carbon.
Okay.
Okay. And for a period of about 200,000 years, going back 56 million years ago, they found a segment in that time gap with an extremely advanced amount of carbon. Now, that's certainly no proof that a civilization existed then, but it's an indicator that something of high strangeness happened to leave that carbon footprint.
Sure.
So I found that fascinating.
And the thing that I find that makes me very suspicious that this has been going on for eons is that the Gobi Tempe wasn't naturally destroyed, wasn't naturally done by time. It was filled in.
Mm-hmm.
And so and as you said, how do hunter and gatherers be able to do that? They didn't have tools, but yet you see tools. You see they had to have some kind of tools to make carvings, to be able to cut stone, to be able to do that. So there had to be some kind of advanced instruments and knowledge to be able to build that. And if we're going back that amount of time, you just can't make, sense of how they were able to do it without help.
Survivors of the apocalypse, Chris. Advanced human beings that managed to survive.
Could this have been filled in during the flood with sediment? Could that have filled it in?
No.
This happened. This happened after.
Okay. Think about dump trucks just filling in a city, but it wasn't dump trucks. But I mean that's the theory. That's how it was filled in. They just excavating dirt and filled them in.
But that earth would have to come from somewhere. I mean, there would have to be scarring on nearby hillsides or something that shows excavation.
Unless they had help.
Well, Fred Flintstone had this dinosaur that could dig things,
Wow. Now you remember there was in the NASCAR lines. Remember there were certain things that they saw carved out of the middle of a mountain that you couldn't reach. How do you carve stone out of the middle of a mountain that you can't reach? You had to have help. You're talking thousands of years ago, them being able to do that. You cannot tell me that civilization at the time had the technology, the wherewithal to be able to do that without help of an advanced civilization or advanced race.
One of the most egregious examples of this lost technology is the site in Lebanon at Baalbek. Okay. Now, when the Roman Empire, when their army went through there, they ended up building some religious temples to their gods, but they placed it upon stonework that was already there. Stonework that even today, with our technology, we couldn't put in place. Upwards of 1,000 tons block stones. We couldn't move it. How the hell could you move it? 1,000 tons? Are you kidding me? So yeah, these are some of the questions that the mainstream experts, you know what an expert is, right? An expert is a spurt under pressure. My wife just corrected me. She said, "No, Don, a drip under pressure."
A drip under pressure. Okay.
At any rate, nobody can explain that, but yet there they are. These things are so massive and huge, it beggars description. But yet they're there. Somebody put them there. How? We don't know.
Well, one biblical interpretation would say that when Adam and Eve were created, the first humans, that they were considerably larger than we are now. We would consider them as giants. And of course, the corresponding strength would be there. And that having been made by God, they would be imparted with certain skills and knowledge and things they needed to take care of the planet by God, and that for up until the flood, they dominated the earth, these very large humans. And then
Nimrod,
yeah,
one of their descendants,
yeah,
who
and then
was the first worldly or global king.
yep. And
Yeah, yeah.
before him, I think Cain was the maker of cities. It says he went off and built a city. So I mean, there are obviously other people around, and probably very large people. I know
Hey,
that.
Padre, I got a question for you.
Yeah,
They were the first people, right?
yeah.
Where did Nimrod and Cain and the rest of those guys find women to marry?
Well, they would have married their sisters that wouldn't be mentioned, or they would have been marrying the descendants of Adam and Eve. And also, we need to take a look at the fact that there are probably people being created that aren't mentioned in that story. It says, "Let us make man in our own image," and that could be a more than one person. The Adam and Eve story tells us how sin entered the world, but the number of people was obviously coming out much greater. And you're talking about people that live to be 6, 7, 8, 900 years old, and you can have a lot of kids in that time. And so, that's a possible explanation. We want to try to condense that time period, I think, too narrowly. I think that we want to just say that it was, well, the earth was made 10,000 years ago and everything happened since then. I'm not, I go back and forth on that, but I think that definitely people were bigger, they were stronger, they were smarter. They would have been able to have these skills. Could they have developed machinery? Could they have developed tools? Well, somebody had to in order to cut those stones. I mean, even in Egypt, you look at what the pyramids are made out of, and you're there in the Bronze Age. Bronze tools won't cut that kind of stone. They had to have something else to cut those blocks that make up the pyramid. And how many
Before
millions?
bronze was copper, and copper is the
It's soft.
softest metal around.
Yeah. So they had to have, like you said, help. There had to be something technologically there that they were able to use because from what we know so far, they didn't have it. Well, I do see, let's see, we're coming up here.
Padre, I just want to quickly say,
Yeah.
there's so much evidence that are around the world, but we don't really, we study it, we acknowledge it, but we never wrap our heads around that this stuff is not made by just our hands.
Yeah.
Look at the Nazca lines, look at all Egypt, look at all this stuff that Don has mentioned, cities that we found underwater, the Aztec area, so much stuff that they could not possibly build. The precision is too precise, but yet we don't acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And say, yeah.
But we're in our history classes, to the extent they even teach history anymore in high school. You're seeing they completely ignore the ancient civilizations. And I think that we're being taught false history in schools today, that they don't go back far enough and they don't raise these questions. And if we're ever going to advance as a civilization, we have to address these things because it's part of our heritage. It's part of our history.
And I agree with you, Padre. I think, and it's not just ancient times, it's modern times too. They want to wipe out certain parts of our history. History teaches us what we did right and wrong.
Absolutely.
If we don't study history, then we can't study the good things that human beings have done and the bad things that human beings have done, so we don't repeat those.
Mm-hmm. You're right. I mean, that's the formula right there. History at least rhymes if it doesn't repeat itself. And we're just going to keep having holocausts and genocides and wars that kill millions of people until we actually understand what causes these things and say, no, we don't want to play that game anymore. But it almost comes to mind that maybe there's an external influence that is propagating all that evil. Of an evil force that wants us to destroy each other.
How do you keep control?
Yeah.
If you're sitting up on top of the mountain, how do you control all those unruly savages running around? You divide them. You divide them. Okay. Yeah. You make them paranoid. You scare them. This group over here, they want your land. This group up there, they want your women. This group over here, they want your riches. And all these beings then get together and
I don't want to get political, but we're going through it right here in the United States.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yep.
They're dividing us to say, how dare they steal all this money? And the other side say, how dare they find all this money that we're stealing? I mean, it is what it is.
And then if anyone dares to come forward and try to break the cycle, they get killed. I mean, whether you're talking about Jesus or Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or people who've said, we're not going to play this game anymore, they're out of there. It's
but they made it obvious. They're making it obvious now.
Yeah.
Look at RFK. RFK is a big believer in better health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you might not like some of his ideas and stuff like that, but you got to admit he wants to protect children and stuff, and he wants to go after the pharmaceutical companies. Well, guess what? Why wouldn't you want to give that guy protection? But yet the Biden administration says, we're not going to give you any protection.
Well, at least that's behind us now, and we can move on to better things. Just in the closing minute or so before we go to our second hour here at UAP Crossfire, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about hairy hominids in UFOs. Is there, in fact, a connection between Bigfoot? Want to look at some cases in which there have been sightings of the two together and what they've been doing. Want to also bring up the Jacob Barber video that we reviewed a couple of weeks ago. Ross Coulthard's report where we saw the egg supposedly below a helicopter being retrieved, a non-human intelligence craft. Was that really what we were looking at, or were we looking, in fact, at something else? We're going to have all of these things coming up in our second hour at UAP Crossfire, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Welcome back to UAP Crossfire. You're here tonight getting the latest news and insight on unidentified anomalous phenomenon. We have been talking about ancient civilizations. We've talked about the new task force. It's going to supposedly blow the lid off all this. want to go back a couple weeks now to the supposedly earth-shattering video we were all shown of a giant egg supposedly suspended below a helicopter being recovered as a non-human intelligence craft. Turns out that really wasn't what we were looking at, was it? Chris, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I've talked to helicopter pilots, watched videos of pilots. I mean, Commander Cobra's been on the show, and everybody is disputing that thing was, one, a helicopter, two, that the video does not portray an actual helicopter, landing an object. There's just so many things wrong with it. And the problem with the video, and it hurts Jake Barber, because whoever sent that video, now my understanding is Jake Barber had nothing to do with that video. He wasn't the pilot in that thing. That's not him. And that should have been said right up front.
Absolutely.
Because what happens is now it tarnishes his testimony to Russ Cohart, because they show the video, they believe the video is false. Now, how far down the rabbit hole does Jake Barber go? Where is any of his testimony false? I'm not saying it is, but you can put, these things together and say, wait a minute, you got to question him now.
The way that show was presented, I don't know about you guys, but I thought that I was given the impression that Jake Barber was flying that craft.
Correct.
That was dropping off the egg.
Correct.
In fact, he wasn't. And it was somebody else. And just like you said, Chris, that to me kind of tarnishes the story a bit. Mr. Decker, your comments.
Well, in Vietnam, I was in an area that was very, very far up north, and I ended up being on various fire bases. And the reason I mention that is we had choppers bring in supplies, various things, ammunition, mortar rounds, rations, sea ration, that type of thing. And they would lower it on pallets, from the helicopter, dangling from the helicopter. And when I first saw that video, the first thing that struck me, where in the hell's the ground crew? There was nobody there to receive it. Then, and I thought about it, I had to think about it, because at first I didn't even consider it. And then I thought, where in the hell is the chopper wash coming down from those blades? And as a little time went on, I came to the conclusion, and remember, News Nation had been pushing this thing. This is earth-shattering. You'll never look at the world the same way again, this kind of business. And the bottom line was, it was a bait and switch. And I got to tell you, I'm not saying that Barber is not a veteran. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he wasn't a chopper pilot. I'm not saying he didn't go in special operations. I don't know. I obviously was not there. But I ended up thinking of this entire fiasco, and I've seen it all the years that I've been in this field, and I'll just be very blunt. Another bucket of bullshit, that was trying to be passed as something earth-shattering, and it wasn't.
Do you think that this harms his testimony going forward? Because Mr. Coulthard has said this week that he has just scratched the surface of what Mr. Barber and those who are with him on this journey are going to be presenting.
Well, if you're asking me, Padre, yeah, it sure as hell did. It damaged him for me. And I'm sure, I'm not speaking for Chris, but I'll be very surprised if Chris is not highly skeptical of anything else that comes out of that outfit.
Well, Chris, is he right?
He's pretty much right. I mean, here's the thing that if Jake Barber was, in that testimony when he was talking, if he did not know about the film, but they showed him, why wouldn't he have said, "Hey, that's not mine," right there? And that would have been giving him a lot of credibility. Or if they showed him that film before they went on the show, and he says, You can't put me with that thing. You
Mhm.
can't associate me with that." So he had to either go along with it,
Mhm.
totally surprised by it, and didn't refute it. Either way, he should have done one of those two things. And that's what makes me very suspicious now of anything that comes out of his mouth, because, he allowed this stuff to go forward when he should have been able to say, "No, you're not going to put me with that."
Yeah. Well, I know that according to Mr. Coulthard, I was listening to him yesterday with Bryce Zabel on their podcast, and they say that Mr. Barber and others who will be coming forward are very concerned for their safety. As you gentlemen pointed out at the beginning of the show, who wouldn't be? And they're taking very serious armed security measures to ensure their safety. And we'll just have to see what else comes forward. I'm in the business of forgiveness, but I'm not willing to be fooled. So I'll listen to what comes up next, but I'll have maybe a little different perspective.
Let me just put this out there. Every one of these guys who are military guys, Lou Elizondo, Grush, Jake Barber, all these guys who are military people, if they have a clearance or they've done classified work, they have to go in front of the inspector general before they release it, whistleblower or not. They just can't come out and say, "Hey, I was on this classified mission,
Mhm.
and here we go," and start telling people. They are told what to say and what they can't say.
Yeah.
And Grush acknowledged that. Grush
Yep.
actually said, "I had to have a briefing before I came here
Mhm.
to understand what I can say and what I can't say."
Mhm.
So the stuff that he may want put out, Jake Barber, he was told you can't say it. Remember, Grush actually said when they asked him about Roswell, he says, "I cannot talk about that. I'm not allowed to talk about that." So,
Which, if it was just a weather balloon, he could talk about it.
right, exactly. Yeah. So there's things that these guys are briefed on that they have to say, "Hey, I want to touch this subject." "No, you can't." "Yeah, I want to touch this subject." "No, you can't."
Yeah.
And so that leads to me to having less credibility because they're not really whistleblowers. They're just mouthpieces for the government.
I've been burned myself many times in this field over the years. And I've gotten to the point where, quite frankly, and I'll be the first to say it, I've become a curmudgeon about a lot of this stuff. Okay.
No.
And that's true. It's true.
Hard to believe.
And Barber, okay, I got to say I'm highly skeptical now of any of that. If, in fact, he was part of a genuine recovery process on a recovered, suspected extraterrestrial object, I can't believe he would talk about it, whistleblower or no, because he knows what the consequences could be on something like that. Now, I had a very good friend by the name of Carl Wolf. Does that name ring a bell with you, Chris?
Yes, it does.
Carl, I knew Carl going back to the early 90s. Carl had been an Air Force veteran, an electronics technician. Carl, because of his duties, had to be vetted, was given a top security clearance. All right. And in I think it was 65 or 66, when NASA sent their first moon probes up in lieu of the Apollo program to photograph the moon, okay, for possible landing spots for our Apollo astronauts, The technology then, how it worked was the probe or the craft would fly in layers around the moon. And the cameras on board would photograph these strips that were beneath the lunar probe, and then radio the telemetry back to Earth. And they went to Langley Air Force Base. Now, guess what else is in Langley? Let me think. There's
Three-letter
something
agency.
else in Langley. Yeah. One of those agencies. But anyway, Carl one morning reported in for duty, and his commander said, hey, you've got to go over to this building, this facility. They're getting the lunar photos back, and something happened to one of their printers, and it stopped working. Get your trash, get over there, see if you can fix it. So he gathered up his stuff, got in his car, drove over to the proper building, was checked in, high security, okay, going into this, very high security. And you wouldn't think a NASA, well, you know, it's kind of funny. But he got over there, got in. He said the first thing he noticed were that there were people in there from all around the globe, scientists, all right? Well, on the one hand, you can kind of accept that, sure. This was groundbreaking stuff. But somebody took him back to the room where they had the printers. And he went in there and he said there was all, and this is what he told me personally. I mean, I talked to him. I interviewed him for the magazine. I had him on my radio show. Okay. His story never changed. He went into this office. He said there was one lone, and now I kind of chuckled. He called him a worker bee, an Air Force airman that was in there. And Carl said, I'm Sergeant Wolf. I'm here to take a look at your printer. And the guy showed him the printer, and Carl got working on it. And he discovered one of the, what the hell do you call it? One of the panels or something in the printer had fried. He had to replace it. So he made a call and told him what he needed. Of course, they had all this stuff stored and stacked up in case something happened. So he's standing there, top secret, secure facility. All right. And he said this kid that was sitting there looked like he was troubled. But he said, look, this was a secured location. I knew better than to say anything. And he said, finally, this guy turned around and looked at me and he said, we found a base on the moon. And Wolf said, what? You found a base? What, Russians? No. The kid got a couple of pictures out and showed him. And I said, well, Carl, what'd you see? He said there were buildings. There were things that looked like satellite dishes. And I said, where in the hell was this? He said, on the far side of the moon. I said, oh my God. He said, I went home that night and I was convinced that they were going to make an announcement on the news about this. He said, I waited a week, then I waited another week. Nothing ever came out. Well, in the beginning of the 21st century, one of our favorite people, Stephen Greer, had basically a news symposium type thing where he brought in a number of people, okay, to discuss their knowledge of alleged black programs. Carl was invited. He went and he told this story. Well, that wasn't the only place he told the story, but he told the story. And a few years ago, and Carl used to live here in California. He had since moved out. And he was out riding his bicycle one day, and he was the victim of a hit-run driver killing him, and they never found the perpetrator. Now, can that be pinned back to what he did? I don't know, but I'm a suspicious guy, okay? I have been known to be suspicious of a lot of things, and I've always wondered about that. And Chris, I could tell when I asked if you knew who that was, you knew what I was going to talk about.
Right.
Do you got any suspicions about that?
Oh, there's a lot of suspicions. There's been so many people that have died mysteriously. I mean, you can go back and talk about the guy that was an engineer for the United States government that dug what they call dumb tunnels or dumb places, deep underground military bases, and he was killed. They said it was a suicide, but the way things were set up, the scene was staged, and it was probably a homicide. So there are people who have gotten knowledge and they've gone. And I just want to add this too, that we have seen so many different things pop up and we're just not acknowledging them. For instance, on February 7th, the scientists have come out and said, we got a radio signal from an exoplanet that's 70 trillion miles away. And it's a reoccurring radio signal. Why isn't anybody jumping up and down? You're getting a radio signal from another planet 70 trillion miles away that's reoccurring. It's not a random thing. It's not something that happened once, like the wow signal or something. This is reoccurring. Yet, I don't see it in the mainstream media. I don't see reporters reporting on it. It's not sensational. They know there's so much evidence out there, but if they can't make a story like Russ Kohar did on News Nation, like this, it's even though how important that is, they just let it die.
Well, I got to tell you, speaking of Russ Coulthard, my estimation of him has dropped because of that News Nation fiasco.
You think he might have played?
Don, I think they just want entertainment now out of this subject. They're not looking at a scientific value anymore. They're looking at entertainment. Let's entertain the people instead of giving them, the information.
Well, let's circle back on something that you said very close to the beginning of the show, Chris. You're mentioning Tucker Carlson, and I've heard him say that too, that what he has heard is so dark and so upsetting. He can't say it to anybody.
Right.
Speculate. What do you think it is?
Well, Padre, we said this many times in the show, and the same thing Admiral Ganault said. There's a spiritual component to this entire thing. Now, how far it goes, where it goes, how devious it is, how demonology plays into this, is anybody's speculation because we failed to look at it. How many scientists look at this spirituality of this type of topic? Very few. I know of one down in Florida. He works with the Orion Project down there. He is totally convinced that aliens are demons. These are demons. And first thing I asked him was, well, a demon doesn't need a flying saucer to go from place to place. He says, it does when they want to deceive you. Yeah. It's true. So, I mean, he had a good thing to that. So do I believe there's a spiritual component? And I do agree with Don says that there is something so nefarious, so evil to this thing that if there's going to be consequences that are going to come out if the president goes out in the Rose Garden and says, we've been visited, they're walking among us, extraterrestrials are real, they're here, we can't do anything about it.
What do you think? I mean, to me, that's a benign statement. I mean, there's the initial wow reaction that, oh, well, that's something I didn't know yesterday. But then when people settle down, they say, well, if they've been walking among us for a few thousand years and I have a pretty good life, why should I care? I mean, they haven't.
Okay, I'll give you an example of that.
Okay.
So you know how there was a Bigfoot sensation that you talked about in the beginning of the show,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So there's so much publicity about Bigfoot. Two guys went out in the woods to go hunting. The other guy says, I'm picking up a stick, and he starts knocking against the thing.
Mm-hmm.
He said, other hunter goes, what are you doing? I'm calling Bigfoot. Now, we're kind of joking on that.
Yeah.
What's the other hunter do? He gets so frightened, he shoots the other hunter. Shoots him. That's a true story. That we reported that about a year and a half ago, that he was so scared of the phenomenon of a Bigfoot that he shot the guy that was joking around about calling Bigfoot.
Wow.
So there is, and Don, you know about the Condon report.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yes.
There's an element where people are very scared how people are going to react. We, as a police officer, we have seen the public, when something is put out, that they get very frightened about. Like, they become motivated, that they think their neighbors or the person down the street is something to affect a terrorist or an alien or something to that. And the first thing they do is they want to either contain it, destroy it, or get rid of it.
There's been a couple of stories, and in fact, one just this last week, of a guy that went berserk on an airliner, and he kept pointing at another passenger and saying that person isn't human, and just was freaking out. And it kind of makes you wonder, well, what if there are certain people who have the gift of being able to detect that? I mean, for all intents and purposes, the guy looked perfectly normal, but the ability to see into that other realm. I mean, what if some people have that?
All right, so I can only go by what I know. So I'm going to give you a story about my grandchild.
Okay.
So my grandchild goes and she starts talking in her room, right? And my daughter goes in the room and goes, honey, who are you talking to? I'm talking to grandma. She's got red hair just like me. How would she know that? Grandma died when her son, my son-in-law, died when my son-in-law was 13 years old.
Oh, my word. That is strange.
How would she know?
Yeah.
And we're like, I'm going to my daughter, what? She goes, she's talking. I says, honey, who are you talking to? I'm talking to grandma. Grandma has red hair just like me and stuff. And you know what she said?
What?
She says, hasn't daddy gotten big? Because my son-in-law works out with weights, and he's a monster. He's really healthy. He's into health food stuff, and he is like solid. But he wasn't that way as a child when his mother died. He was a scrawny little kid.
Huh.
So there's something to this component. I don't know.
Well, children have not yet been taught, little children like that,
Right,
have not been taught that you can't see or talk to people that have passed on. Okay. They're open. They're open to it. And I've always believed, hey, when I was and I still to this day, I remember this. When I was a little guy, before my sister was born, and she was born, I was about 4.5, almost 5 years old before she was born. I could fly. I was convinced I could fly like a bird. Okay. Now, a lot of that is mished up in my head. I talked to, as a matter of fact, Bud Hopkins. Okay. Bud Hopkins, who was very well known in the field. I talked to him about that one time. He was friends of Vicky of mine. And he said, he said what that could be. And I said, I don't have a clue. He said, maybe you remember being floated out of your room. Now, I did have a very mysterious thing happen in 1968 that for a long time I didn't even remember. But Hopkins brought it out of me, and I've always wondered about it. But at any rate, maybe, little kids like that, well, you can do a hell of a lot with a little kid.
Sure.
And they won't think it's strange or off kilter. I don't know.
Interesting.
What do you think, Padre?
The Bible actually speaks to this. There's a Bible story in 1 Samuel about a king named Saul, and he was the first king of Israel, succeeded by David. And Saul was having a bad time. He had sinned against God. His kingdom was going to be taken over, and he was beside himself on the night before battle with the Philistines. And so he did something that was a capital offense by his own decree. He sought out a medium, the witch of Endor. And he goes to this woman who can summon the spirits of the dead, or that's supposedly what she's capable of doing. And she does her seance bit. And he had asked her to summon the prophet Samuel, who had died, so that Samuel could give him advice like Samuel did when he was alive. Well, it turns out that when the spirit appears, it's not who she was expecting. It was actually Samuel himself. And she freaked out. And she said, "You've entrapped me. You've set this up so that you could kill me." And he says, "Settle down. I want to hear what Samuel has to say." The Bible says that these people who supposedly can summon the dead and talk to the dead have familiar spirits that are demons. And these demons can take the form of whoever it is they want to contact. And of course, being almost ageless and having supernatural knowledge, they can submit knowledge in the voice and in the shape and the appearance of the person who's died. And these people can make a lot of money if they're good at that, but it is ultimately something evil. And the Bible says, don't do that because it's not good for you spiritually and it offends God. So I think that once we're gone from this life, I think that our souls live on for eternity, and our relationship with God determines where we will spend that eternity. So that's my take on it. And I know it may not be popular with a lot of people, but that's what my Bible tells me.
And there you go.
So let's move into Bigfoot for a while. Whether or not Bigfoot exists, there have been multiple UFO sightings in the vicinity of these creatures. And I did some digging, and I found some interesting discrepancies. And you guys have been in the field far longer than I have, and tell me if this doesn't jive with what you've heard. We have what I think are two kinds of hairy hominid. One that is somehow affiliated with UFOs and one that isn't. The one that isn't, don't know what it is, but it's the hairy, upright, human-looking creature with 5 fingers or 4 fingers and a thumb and 5 toes. Normal colored eyes, brown eyes. The one that seems to be sighted more in the vicinity of UFOs has 3 toes and glowing red eyes. Does that seem to fall in line with what some of you guys have seen?
Don, you go first if you want to.
Yeah, it does. I've never really jumped deeply into Bigfoot until relatively recently, but I have been aware of the alleged 2 types of creature. Back in the 90s, I was exposed to an investigator that was back east, okay, and he relayed to me a story that he had looked into, but there was a husband and wife The guy was a part-time farmer. He had a regular day job. Okay, he couldn't subsist strictly on the farming. He had a regular day job, and they lived in a suburban area. And over the preceding week or so, there were a number of UFO sightings. Okay. Now, one morning, a few days after these sightings had happened, he got up, got ready, had his breakfast, cup of coffee, went to work, and his wife was in the kitchen. Now, out here in California, this might be considered kind of rednecky kind of living, but I'm originally from back east, and knew a lot of people. They would keep a rifle or shotgun handy. In this case, the woman had one in her kitchen, leaning up against the back door. And she was washing dishes. She looked out the window and she saw this hairy looking creature step over the fence and approach the house.
Uh-oh.
He walked up on the porch. Okay. She grabbed the shotgun. She had a shotgun there. She grabbed the shotgun, opened up the door, and fired the shotgun point blank into this creature. Now, imagine if you were that woman, okay, standing there and you're confronted with this. Mm-hmm. That may sound a little extreme, but I can certainly see how it would happen. But that's not the strangest part of the story. The strangest part of the story was when she shot this thing, it exploded. This was her testimony to the police, into a flash of light, and it was gone. Now, they know something was there because they found footprints leading from the woods up to the fence, over the fence, and up to her house. Now, I don't know. I wasn't there. But that story always kind of resonated with me. By the way, that was the 3-toed variety of the Bigfoot creature, not the 5 toes.
The 3-toed ones tend to be the most aggressive of the two. The 3-toed ones with the red eyes are the ones that typically have the violent confrontation with humans. And it had me thinking maybe these are, I mean, if you go into the primal mind of humans and you create a monster that is most terrifying, I think most people would be afraid of something that looked like a man beast, something that was a cross between a human and an aggressive animal, a wolf man, an ape man, something that you isn't completely wild, but also isn't completely human. And it makes me wonder if these 3-toed giant, whatever they are watchdogs to keep people away from craft that are doing something to scare people. Thoughts on that, Chris?
Well, there's a few thoughts. First, I do agree with Don and you were saying that there has been reports of sightings of craft landing and a Bigfoot coming out, staying by the craft and getting back on the craft, and away they go. And we've had sightings of that. But here's the other thing. We've had people say they've watched the Bigfoot get off the craft and not getting back on. They've just, it's almost like you let a animal loose into the woods. So there was one theory at one time that they were populating Bigfoot onto the earth here from another planet. The people have kicked that idea around and saying that they are actually extraterrestrials that have been brought here to see if they can survive on this planet and multiply and do that. But we do know that during the course of time that we not only have we had Bigfoot sightings, but we had aggressive sightings. They've attacked Winnebagos. They've attacked people, like Don said, at people's houses. They've had attacks of people in the woods. David Politis has done several books on, I think it's 411 missing, where people have been alleged to be maybe possibly abducted by a Bigfoot. Bones, bodies have been found. But the interesting thing is bodies have been found in ways that they shouldn't have been found. For instance, their shoes, their socks, and everything taken off. They weren't ripped off. They were taken off by who knows what. Children have been found in places where it's impossible to pass, up a steep mountain for like 5 miles, where a young child of 4 or 5 cannot do that. They don't have the physical ability to make that terrain. So these Bigfoot sightings, it's just fascinating because you look at them, some of them have been violent, some of them have been just we're curious about you and you're curious about us, kind of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's ones where people have been abducted and never seen again.
Right. Yeah. There's that program. Was it 411 about hunters that go missing every year?
Yeah. Experienced hunters.
Yeah.
People who know how to navigate into the woods.
I'm a hunter. I've spent my share of time in forests and in the backwoods. And it's when you are out there in a remote area, especially in places like Alaska, and you're alone, how do I describe this? It's like there are certain senses in you that have been repressed that come to the forefront again. I mean, they've always been with you, but you've never really used them. So there have been instances, for example, when I've been walking along and I've got the feeling, okay, something's following me. Something is stalking me. And, I'll turn around and there'll be a mountain lion or something like that. And, once he makes eye contact with me, he decides he doesn't want any of that action. So he takes off. Or a bear. I've had 4 close encounters with a bear in my lifetime in the woods that were not intentional or planned. But if people are out and they have that sensation of being watched, it's something I think they really need to pay attention to. And you don't really know animals are so good at hiding. They're so good at being camouflaged. And I agree with Chris that, one of these Bigfoot things is definitely, if it is another species of ape, wild animal, it has survived all this time without being definitively cataloged and tagged because its primary defense is staying hidden. It wants to be left alone. And so it's skilled at evasion and being away from people. But there are others like this 3-toed variety, especially their areas. I think it's in south central Missouri, where there's this creature called a momo that when it appears, and it's a 3-toed variety, it's almost always accompanied by lights in the sky. And I'm wondering if in some of these areas, those creatures are protecting, as I said, something. They're watchdogs. They're telling people, stay out of this area. And I think that there's some locals that have that feeling as well. Are there any other areas you gentlemen can think of around the country or around the world where these hominids seen in proximity to UFOs might indicate?
Well, I've heard a very interesting theory.
Okay.
On the 5-toed variety of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Okay.
And I was first exposed to it on a web series, The Y-Files. Are you guys familiar with the Y-Files?
Very much. Yep.
Okay.
Love Hector.
That early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals basically coexisted during the same time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And the indicators are that Neanderthals, which were by no means the brutish, stupid cave dwellers that for a long time people made them out to be. Their brain was as large as ours, perhaps a little larger. They were much more muscular than Homo sapiens sapiens. They definitely knew their environment and they survived for a very long time. And that sometimes they viewed Homo sapiens sapiens as prey, and they would hunt them down, kill them, and cannibalize them for food. Okay. And one episode on the Y-Files that he talked about was that at one point there was basically what could be construed as full-blown warfare between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, Bigfoot today, this was the theory that perhaps they aren't all gone. They didn't all die off or die out. That Sasquatch, Bigfoot, may be a remnant of the Neanderthals. What do you guys think about that?
Well, the question immediately comes to mind about that is that the Neanderthal skeletons that we found are basically our size. I mean, they were perhaps maybe a bit more muscular and big boned, but they were generally, our height. And these Sasquatch things, they're anywhere from 7, 8, 9 feet tall and 4, 5, 600 pounds. I'm wondering how that would be a Neanderthal. I'm not saying, that you're wrong, Don. I'm just saying that that's something that just pops up at me.
This brings me to mind, we were talking off air, I believe, about, remember, Padre, you mentioned something about special units that would hunt these things. There was a story in Lake Placid, now upstate New York, in Lake Placid area, a very wooded area, hugely wooded. And they've always had Bigfoot sightings near and around the area there. But there was one time where a child was missing. And I don't know what the evidence was, but they had moved the local police out and they helicopter in some military people who nobody knew, nobody was to talk to them, and they went into the woods. Now, I've never seen that done before in my entire police career. Have you, Don? Have you ever seen? But
no,
this is what
no.
this is what we believe had taken place up in Lake Placid, years ago, that they, for whatever reason, these guys came in, didn't talk to anybody. They were given a briefing. In the woods they went. And that was about it.
Child?
No.
Was
No.
it Army? Is that what it was?
No, we don't know. I mean,
branch.
they said there was no distinct markings on them that they could identify as a Marine or U.S. Army. They couldn't see, there wasn't any rank structure that they could see on a person. They were just choppered in, guys coming out with camo uniforms, military weapons. They go in, they get a briefing, they're into the woods, and, they come out and away they go.
Well, I've heard reports of military units on maneuvers in forested areas come across a Sasquatch now and then, and scares them, but they part ways. And I've always wondered what would happen if we had a president or somebody who said, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and for the next month you guys are going to train in the Pacific Northwest forests and find one or don't, sort of thing.
Well, I can tell you that was one of the most unbelievable stories I was told, but I was told by some very credible people that they had taken place. But we all know there's special operators that they don't wear insignias and stuff. So I know that part is true. I've seen operators come in where they don't wear, military insignias like they normally. Matter of fact, they usually come in sometimes in jeans and T-shirts and look like something that just came off the homeless street.
I read a report couple of weeks ago of an incident that happened a few years back. A guy was with a group, actually a church group, that was up in a camp in a remote area, and they got somehow involved with another group that was actually out looking for Bigfoot. And what he described was so terrifying is something happened where they had to get back, and they were heading down the mountain and it was dark. And so they said, okay, it's not safe for us to travel any farther. We're going to have to just sleep out under the stars here. And he sees an orb, and it's, about a basketball size glowing orb that comes out of the forest, looks them over, and then disappears. And of course, that shook him up a little bit. And then they're sleeping in their sleeping bags. And I think he said it was about 3 a.m. He hears heavy footfalls on the gravel road nearby come, and he senses this huge thing standing over him in the dark, and he can hear it breathing. And it's not a human breath sort of a thing. And of course, he's scared out of his mind. And, thankfully for him, after a couple of minutes of just kind of staring down at him, I mean, he kind of vaguely make out this hulking shape. It just turned and walked back into the woods. And then they had another encounter with orbs. So it comes to mind, what about shape-shifting aliens? I know at Area 51, not Area 51. What's that ranch? The Skinwalker Ranch.
Skinwalker, yeah.
Yeah, they report strange shape-shifting entities. Are you guys familiar at all with UFO cases that involve shape-shifting aliens?
Don, go ahead.
Not offhand. Shapeshifters, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Not connected to UFOs per se,
Mm-hmm.
but I did interview 2 former Navajo police, I believe they called themselves scouts,
Mm-hmm.
that worked down on the Navajo reservation. This was in the area of
The
Arizona,
Navajo Rangers.
Mexico. Thank you, Chris. Navajo Rangers, yes. And they had some and I had to pry it out of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not something they relish talking about because there's a cultural thing
Mm-hmm.
there. But they regard the phenomenon as very real,
Mm-hmm.
potentially very lethal.
Mm-hmm.
And they relayed one case where a guy and his wife, Navajo people, found what appeared to be a coyote or an animal of some type, a canine animal that was out around their house. And the man grabbed a rifle, went out and shot this thing a number of times, killed it, ended up killing it. And then allegedly, the animal shape disappeared and they had a human body laying there. Now, this was a story that they told. I have no idea.
You're fortunate to have them share that with you, because in my experience, they just do not want to talk about shapeshifters with non-Native Americans. Chris, have you had any experience in that area?
Yeah, it brings me to mind of Mike McClellan, who wrote a book called The Messengers. Mm-hmm. So we could take aliens. Now, as far as canines and stuff, that's not the normal thing that we see. We see that aliens shift themselves into animals like owls, deers, and rabbits. We've had several cases where, matter of fact, Mike, when I interviewed him, Mike told me about a case where these 2 people were walking down this trail, and they actually spotted an alien. And as the alien saw them, it shifted itself into a deer and took off and stuff. But that's not really, they're not really, from what Mike says, they're not really shifting into a deer. They're implanting a memory that it looks like a deer. It looks like an owl. Now, I had one person said, I saw a deer, and I go, well, that's not unusual. You looked out your window and saw, yeah, Chris, I was on the second floor, and the deer was staring into the window. So when you have something like that, now you become very suspicious of, that's not a shape shifting. It's an implanted memory from what we kind of gather this might be. And they do it with rabbits. And here's the biggest thing. We've found with children, they come back as a cartoon character or a pirate. We had a case where a child was possibly abducted, and there was a storybook pirate. And the pirate said, hey, come with me. And they went to a tree, and they entered the tree. Now, we laugh at that, but if you wanted not to make a child scared, how, because obviously a gray would scare me, would scare anybody here. But if you didn't want to scare a child from screaming or anything, why wouldn't you not come back as a cartoon character? And instead of a saucer, why not implant a memory of a tree? See, these are the things that are happening that very few people know about, but we get constant reports of this all the time. So we look and say, hey, listen, this is not, they can implant memories. We know that because many of abductees have had implanted memories. So if I wanted to take and do that, then I would do plant a memory into you.
It's interesting, but it raises a question. If some alien species had the ability to, if not shapeshift, as you say, make you think you were seeing something else, when they come into someone's room at night, why do they come as aliens? They could come as angels, as friendly people they know. There's a mythological creature in Indian folklore called a Rakshasa, and the Rakshasa takes the form of somebody that you trust before it kills and eats you. And so the ability of some alien to appear as something else, you'd think they would use that skill more often, don't you think?
I can't answer that one.
Well, our producer is telling us that there's a new show coming on to KGRA DB, probably starting up here in March, called Paranormal Rangers. That's going to deal with some of this topic, and I think that's something that we'll all be looking forward to and getting some more information on that. But before we go tonight, we have about 5 minutes left, and I want you both to address something that might help me, and that is if for somebody who may be new to UAP Crossfire or new to the UAP phenomenon, and I'm sure we have new people tuning in every week, what book or resource would each of you recommend to them to pick up that might be a good place to enter into the topic? Start with you, Don.
Well, a book that I absolutely have had the greatest respect for many years is a book written by Barry Greenwood and Lawrence Fawcett called Clear Intent, and they have since retitled it. But if you were to pop that into your search engine, Clear Intent, Barry Greenwood, Larry Fawcett, or Lawrence Fawcett, it'll give you the current title. It's available on Amazon, and this is a book. They did extensive research into this book. Fawcett was a police officer, a lieutenant. Okay, the UFO cover-up. There we go. Skywatcher popped in. Very good. And this book is primarily concerned with military and nuclear military encounters with the phenomenon. That's one book. Now, very quickly, there's another series of books. There are 4, all in basically, they're all available on Amazon. And it's involved with intelligence agencies and the UFO phenomenon or phenomena, how they're influenced and manipulated by intelligence agencies. And let me grab something here. The author's name is Gary S. Beckham. There are 4 books all told, very inexpensive. But the one I'm holding right here, it's called To the Moon and Back, is involved with a famous guy in the remote viewing field that was part of the government's Stargate program, a fellow by the name of Ingo Swann. I was very honored to know and count Ingo as a friend. He had a number of absolutely mind-bending experiences during the remote viewing program. Any of those books by Beckham, Bekkum, I would highly suggest.
Okay, 60 seconds, Chris, your book recommendation.
Kathleen Martin, any books that Kathleen Martin gets about abduction, she goes right into Betty and Barney Hill. I really like the work that she's done. David Paulides, if you like to find out what's going on in the national forests, David Paulides' books are excellent to read that way. And I like some of the stuff that Richard Dolan has put out. Good stuff.
Richard Dolan. Okay, I'm writing all of these down for myself to add to my library. And with that, gentlemen, we are coming to the end of our program tonight. I thank you both for taking the time to come on here with me and talk about UAPs and the paranormal and Bigfoot. We covered a lot of territory tonight. For those of you listening and watching, I hope that you enjoyed the UAP Crossfire experience. We invite you to come back next Thursday night, and we will be here once again on UAP Crossfire. Have a nice evening.